The curtain has very much been brought down on Australian rugby in 2024. Ireland too good for the Wallabies, getting up by 3 points, 22-19 overnight in Dublin. The third straight defeat for the Wallabies by 3 points in Dublin. It's a ridiculous statistic. It's a game that lived up to expectation, hope, but a result that will be so hard to swallow for a lot of Wallabies that are desperate for success, and indeed the Aussie rugby public that is itching to see this famous side get back to its past glories. I'm Christy, Doran. You're listening to the Roar Rugby Podcast, this rapid fire edition, and I'm joined this week by Nick Wasiliev. Nick, how are you? Very good morning. It's just after 5 o'clock and you've been up for a few hours like I have. Oh, so close, right?
Oh, so close indeed. It's nice to be on the morning shift with you. And I'll tell you what, for those who stayed up, especially the neutrals, that was a game to watch. That was an absolute game to watch to close out the year. But you've nailed it on the head. If you are a Wallabies fan, you'd be feeling a mixture of emotions. A loss is still a loss, and it finishes 2 from 2 on the road. But in my initial headspace thought, considering where this Wallaby side was 12 months ago in 2023, out of a World Cup, only winning 2 Test matches in a year, what a turnaround it has been. What a turnaround it has been in 2024, and you can see that there is things moving in that camp. Things are happening in that camp, and there's a lot to be excited about.
There is. I'll tell you what's funny. That 2 years ago, I had just joined the Raw, and my first assignment basically is I'm on a flight to London, and I watch Eddie Jones's England take down Japan just like they did last week with Steve Borthwick's side, and very quickly had to go to Ireland, and the Wallabies fell short, 13-10. Dave Rennie was the coach at the time, and it was a couple of years of so close yet so far. And for Hamish McLennan, the time he had enough after 3 years, 36% win record for Dave Rennie at the time. Went to Cardiff. It didn't matter, despite a great come from behind victory. And it started an incredible run of decisions. And 2 years later, to go back to be 3 points short, it's funny how it ends up being like this. But I can tell you what, there's not going to be any massive sweeping changes over this Christmas period like there was at the end of 2022. You're right. There has been some great shining lights come from a season that started with the Wallabies so much on the canvas, but they finished the year, don't they, with 6 wins from 13 test matches, 3 wins to start in July, 1 from 6 in the Rugby Championship, 2 from 4 on the Grand Slam tour of the British Isles. But I'll tell you what, for a nation that was laughed at in September when Argentina put 67 on the Wallabies, they were laughed at. They were told that the British and Irish Lions should go to South Africa so that there's no competitive series. I'll tell you what, it'll be a competitive series, all right. Andy Farrell will know it. Ireland will know it. And I think, the entire United Kingdom and Ireland will know it too. And there'll be a lot of people now looking forward to a series because the Wallabies have brought a fair bit of respect back to the brand.
Absolutely, no doubt. There was a word that really stuck out to me in the post-match when Caelan Doris was speaking to the stateside commentator, and the word was relief. I think Ireland knew that they were very lucky to win that match and pull it out of the fire, and to come from behind in that last back end of the game. It is a game of momentum. It is a game like that, and on one level, the Wallabies probably think that's just a game that got away. It would be a game that got away, but my goodness, I think there's so many. I mean, obviously we'll get into it in a second, but there's so many questions or things that were addressed in this match that have been kind of question marks of the Wallabies. I think yes, they went down by 3 points, but some of the defensive efforts that were shown throughout that game, when in that second half, when Ireland was throwing unbelievable pressure and pulling out all the stops to get ahead, was really incredible by the Wallabies. And I think, defence has been talked about a lot this year. It's particularly in the wake of that Argentina loss that was just so massive. I'd argue, would that probably be the best defensive effort of the year, Christy, even though they lost?
Well, I did make a little note about that. It is a staggering amount of possession and territory that they had. Joe Schmidt addressed it. Andy Farrell addressed it. Ireland couldn't catch a cold really in the first half. It was a bit like their effort against New Zealand a few weeks back, where they had some great shape but uncharacteristic mistakes. And it wasn't just, the inside backs this time. It was Hugo Keenan that spilled a couple, usually safe as houses, the fullback. It was Finlay Bilham, the tight head prop, who is from Canberra, made his way to Ireland and has built an impressive body of work behind him and gone to a World Cup and played in big matches and beaten the All Blacks. But they were forced into quite a few mistakes, but they had 59% of possession, 76% of territory. And I always thought that Ireland were going to eventually break through this Wallaby wall. I didn't think it would take 72 minutes for them to really get in front and probably seize the momentum of the game. I think Joe Schmidt said that in his post-match interview that sometimes when you prioritise defence throughout the week, the attack falls off a little bit. And perhaps we saw that. The attack, I thought, was pretty good. It was just the attacking breakdown that Ireland made an absolute mess and a meal of and really slowed it down for the second straight week like Scotland did. But you've really got to be proud of the Wallaby effort there. You only need to let in 3 tries, but to not be able to ship them in the same way that there were so many holes against Scotland. This week, it was Ireland that was sustained relentless pressure, battering down the Wallabies near their own line, and eventually they get over. So Laurie Fisher will be happy with the effort there. It's definitely a bit of a marker, a stake in the ground ahead of next year around what is the standard, the expectation around big match test matches, and how do you stay in the fight? And we saw that overnight.
No 34 missed tackles, a lot less than that. It was a much tighter defensive effort. I think you're absolutely right. Fraser McBride also mentioned it in the post-match as well, and Harry Wilson as well. Breakdown was really where Ireland found their way back into this game. And of course, I think that's also been an area that has been targeted by a lot of sides with the Wallabies. But I think that clearly the efforts that they're making to try and address not just those defensive issues, but the breakdown as well is working considerably. I think as well the fact that another real key stat that stood out to me was the Wallabies managed 8 turnovers in that game, which was more than double what Ireland was able to do. So even then, they were asking a lot of questions of an Ireland pack that, let's not forget, that's got there's a bunch of players who made the World Rugby Dream 15 in there as well. I mean, Doris in there, Josh Van der Fleer has been in there for quite a few times as well. And to also grab that first try with Max Jorgensen picking up the spoils in that first half, it was really just a fantastic effort. If only Tupou, when he plucked that intercept, could have scored it. Suolihi on his left, Williams on his right, and he throws to the wrong man. My heart was in my throat. It was devastating.
It was one of those games where there were so many little moments, and the moment you're talking about there, and we'll come to it in a second, but the Wallabies took a 10-0 run out to a 10-0 lead. Before we get to the intercept, a really unusual moment where Rob Valentini clearly drops the ball off the kick restart. It's a knock on every day of the week, goes through his arms, goes down. It's staggering that an international referee would allow that one to occur. But even more bizarrely, I think the TMO interjects, says that Rob Valentini's led with the arm and made contact high with Mac Hansen, the former Brumby. And it goes from a really awkward clearing exit for the Wallabies to a penalty to Ireland, who then soon after get on the scoreboard through Josh Van der Fleer. But it was just such a weird moment from the TMO, who we didn't really hear in the second half, but in the first half was just jumping in left, right and centre. And it helped the Wallabies to begin with. It didn't help them there. It was unusual because the on-field referee, even though he said that I think there's very little force here, he's made contact with the chest, then decides it's a penalty despite the fact it was more chest than neck. I didn't quite understand that, but Ireland come back 10 points to 5, and then there's a couple of breakdown turnovers. The first from Fraser McWright just before those series, that try, but the second one from Tom Wright was an absolute cracker, and it's what you're talking about there about the on-ball pressure. In the 29th minute, he saved a try. That was inevitable, probably in the next phase, unless Tom Wright gets on the ball, wins it, turns it over. But the pressure didn't stop. And somehow, in the middle of all of this, the biggest bloke on the field, 145 kilos, who's missed the previous 2 test matches, somehow gets in between a couple of defenders, sticks the left mid out and intercepts and runs away. And we've seen Taniela Tuba do that. We saw him at the World Cup, didn't we, last year against Georgia when he intercepted and he thought, hang on, how have I got this? This time, though, unfortunately, he didn't make the right decision. You're right. He did have Suwali on his left who was calling for it. He's got a reasonable right to left pass. He put it on Ben Donaldson's chest a year ago, but he couldn't find him at all. That was classic Taniela Tubo, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, look, to be honest, the forward in me just thought that's the stuff that dreams are made of, with the massive wide open space in front of him and the try line beckoning. But you could tell that Joe Schmidt was screaming in the press box, being surprisingly more colourful than he usually was when he saw when that pass went to hand. It was so good. But like you mentioned earlier, going back to kind of some of those big positives from that game, Fraser McWright, he was everywhere. And I think that this match particularly, I think, shows how good that loose forward combination with him, Harry Wilson and Rob Valentini really is. I think we've kind of I've been thinking about this tour and about looking for those couple of world-class players to stand up, and I think we've got 3 in the loose forwards there, because the trust that is clearly growing between those players. I think that's probably a contender for Fraser's best game in gold, and that's saying something because he's had a couple of bangers in 2024. He was everywhere, and on top of it, when they had the ball, it looked like they were making meters for fun. I think the forward pack should really be really shouted out for this performance.
I do agree. I think that's a good shout. We'll come back to the back row a little bit later. Unfortunately, after a 13-5 lead at halftime, Ireland take the ascendancy in the second half. The fly half, Pendergast knocks over a penalty, and then shortly after, Doris with a try under the sticks. They take the lead, and then 2 penalties to Noah Lolosio before Ireland really break the hearts. They eventually got their 72nd minute. McCarthy scores after a rolling more. Ireland just managed to keep it tight. They did what they do best, which is, generally speaking, relentless pressure, multi-phase attack, and just sheer possession sees them get over the line. Unfortunately, the Wallabies had a couple of late opportunities. They couldn't ice them. Tate Edmund came onto the field. He was Wallaby. I think he's actually Wallaby 890, if I'm not mistaken. Possibly even. No, they're
nearing 1,000 now. They're nearing. Yeah, I think they're nearing 1,000 Wallabies now, so it'll be like 990 something.
I'm going to say Wallaby 900, but I'm going to double check that. But he was unfortunately on the field just for a couple of minutes before you could just see the heartbreak in his eyes, saying, "I'm fine, I want to stay on." But he was concussed after making a late entrance to the field. But it came unstuck in the last few minutes there, the Wallabies, and that's probably where they do need to get to if they're going to start to become a force on the international stage, because we spoke only a few minutes ago about how the Wallabies have kind of like the so close yet so far sort of side. They've not been able to progress for many a year around being able to seal the moment and just step up and be so clutch in the death. And that's something that the All Blacks and South Africa have been able to do over the last 8 years, 9, 10 years, really, really well. You think about Sam Whitelock, Richie Mwanga, those sorts of players that managed to steal games at the end. And the Wallabies weren't able to. Joey Suaalii, I think he was intercepted there, just a little bit ambitious, probably not showing the patience required there. That's probably a moment where you think a bit more composure, backing where you've come from, seeing what you did only against England 3-4 weeks ago, where they managed to get through about 8 or 9 phases before they spread the ball to the left and Max Jorgensen sailed down the left-hand touchline to score. So they have done it, but they just need to be able to do this more, and that's where Super Rugby is going to become pretty important next year as well.
Yeah, how critical a season is that going to be? Not just with the change up of 5 teams being reduced to 4, but how that's going to look going into that Lions series. You're absolutely right. The stat that you alluded at the start: 3 losses in a row to Ireland by a margin of 3. Interestingly, it's 4 losses overall to Ireland, which is actually Ireland's longest ever. It equals Ireland's longest ever win streak over the Wallabies. The last time they did that was between 1958 and 1976, which is a bit of a stat throwback there for you. To tip of the hat to Tony Harper. But you're absolutely right that I was hoping that there was going to be a repeat of that England result, because it felt like that England win at Twickenham felt like the turning of a corner for the Wallabies in terms of so many close losses, so many close results. Clearly can mix it with the best on their day, and alas, it wasn't to be. But not only does that Super Rugby series look extremely valuable with that Lions team approaching, it does, I hope, prove that there's been so much talk, not just about the side and how they're progressing, but also, of course, about Joe Schmidt. It's the elephant in the room. Will he stay on after that Lions series? And part of me had hopes that if he would come away with a 3-1 record at the end of this tour, he probably would have answered his own question himself. He's loved it. By the sound of it, he's absolutely loving being in camp. The players seem to enjoy it, and I think you're starting to see it on the field. The players are playing with a lot of heart and a lot of belief. The fans, I looked online, and the words that really stuck out to me were heart and promise and proud and being on the right path. And I think it's going to also be the question that's going to be on everyone's lips over the entire summer. Will he stay on? Will he continue? Because I think a result like this, even though it's again another close loss, it also shows where they can go. And that Twickenham win, I think, really stuck out in the minds of a lot of people. And I'm hoping that would be enough.
Yeah, well, much to find out about that over the coming weeks. Look, my understanding is that Joe Schmidt's more likely to go than not. We wrote about it on the Roar about 6-7 weeks ago. Said that was his feeling. We touched upon that again just a couple of weeks ago before Ian Payton asked the question, and Joe Schmidt said, look, I'm going to hopefully have a decision by December, because we need to make one. Clearly contingency plans need to start to come to the fore if Schmidt decides post the Lions to wrap up his brief tenure with the Wallabies. But it's been really promising. Look, 6 from 13, I think that's about what you could ask for in his first year. It's under 50% from a winning perspective, which is, I think it continues that since 2015. I don't know if there's been a Wallabies year that's been positive. But more than that, Nick, do you think, I think it's been a huge tick for Joe Schmidt's ability to bring a coaching team aside together. I think he's off the charts in terms of how you'd rank him, even though the Wallabies year on itself would perhaps be a different measure to a Joe Schmidt if you were to rank them from a 1 out of 10. I think Joe Schmidt deserves a big 8 or 9 around where this Wallabies side's come from, even though from a results perspective, from a performance perspective, they're probably not more than a 5 or a 6 at this point in time out of 10.
Oh, no doubt. I think it's such a contrast to last year. And in my headspace, I have to keep reminding myself that it's only been 12 months that what Joe has managed to achieve here. And even before that first Wales game, he admitted that this is the least amount of preparation he's had. He's really had to kind of pull a lot of things together. Tim Horan made a great point in post-match, saying that he feels like the Wallabies have found their DNA again and their heart and their belief under Joe. And I think that is absolutely true. They're only 3 points off, realistically, from this being a winning year. Like if they had pulled that out of the fire and managed, if that Tupou try had gone, it's one of those small moments we'd be talking about a winning year for the first time again, like you mentioned, since we made a World Cup final in 2015. And we'd be having a very, that kind of stat would really, really stick out. Joe is definitely a 7 or an 8 for me. I think for him, I know that he would be someone who would go, I really think we can do better and improve on that, because that's the style of coach and approach he is. And I believe him, but there's no taking away what he has been able to accomplish with this side in this year over the course of 2024. And I think the sides seem happier, the players seem happier. There's a lot to look at and examine.
Oh, there totally is. You made mention of the back row really standing out. I totally think it did. I think Rob Vellatini, the physicality that he once again showed, like there is no questions that he's in that caliber of elite world-class players. I think Fraser McWright, I agree with you, very much went toe-to-toe with Josh van der Flair, who was World Rugby Player of the Year only in 2022. Harry Wilson, I think he's made great strides. I don't know if he's in the absolute elite players of back row play in the world. He's not, Duan Vermeulen only finished up last year. He's not in that caliber of player yet, but where he's come from, the strides he's made, the leadership strides, the work rate, the heart, he ticks so many boxes about everything that you want from a rugby player. And I think it's such a pleasing thing to now to be able to go, you know what, the Wallabies actually have an area of their game which is close to being world class, and that's their back row. I think that's been, if you're dividing them into positional groups, to me that's been by far their best area. You've got to be pleased with the progress of Noel Olosio, who's been backed in to start the vast majority of tests. I think he started in 11 of the 13 matches. Ben Donaldson starting in Argentina in the first win, with Noel Olosio ruled out late, and against Georgia and Sydney as well. So huge progress in terms of the continuity of the side with some of the key players. Matt Fesler once again missed the game with a calf injury, but from 2 to Nick Frost and Jeremy Williams, great breakout year for Jeremy Williams in the second row, but could probably play at 6 as well if necessary. The stability of the back row, the stability of the halves, the progress of the Brumbies kind of axis with Lolosio, Lanikatau into Tom Wright, you're starting to see the hallmarks of a side that's come together after 6 months ago, not knowing who actually is a first choice player in this. We've now seen about 8 or 9 first choice players emerge in this Wallaby side, and that's a massive contrast to what we thought only a few months ago. I reckon that's probably the most pleasing thing.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you highlighted Alessio. I did an opinion piece a few months, probably about a month or so back, talking about how scrutinised the fly half role really is in not just in the context of Australian rugby, but probably when you think about it broader. There's probably the only one you can compare it to how scrutinised it is probably the opening batting of the cricket. Who's going to open the batting for Australia? It's often the topic of discussion at the moment, but I think Noah has really progressed a lot this year. There was moments where we got questioned if he was going into his shell or not, but he's not necessarily a flashy player. What he's getting really good at is being able to direct the troops around and be a bit more, know when to unleash the likes of Ikitau and Wright, and know when it's time for him to either take it up. I've noticed him taking it up a little bit more and taking a leaf out of Carter Gordon's book. But he knows when to utilise those weapons more effectively, which leads into that really great point that you mentioned about key players in those starting positions. I'm so glad you highlighted Williams. I think he's probably the player of the tour for me. What a transformation he has undergone. Line-out general. I think the way he showed up, Maro Itoje at Twickenham, and I think he really asked a lot of questions of a quality Ireland pack in the line-out and at set piece. What a fantastic year he has had. Being out west is doing a lot of good for him. I think he's clearly really enjoying his rugby, and out of nowhere, especially when partnering with Nick Frost. And remember, he's got people like Lukan Salakai-Loto and Will Skelton nipping at his heels, and he's in that starting side.
If I was to ask you who you think is the most improved Wallaby in 2024 to wrap up today's pod, who would you say?
Oh, that's a tough question, and I'm so glad that it is a tough question. It's got to be one of those bolters in this first year. I think for me, it's probably Williams. I think while Fraser has kind of been on the periphery for a couple of years, he's really also come into his own as a player. I mean, Rob Ballatini, I think, has probably been the player of the year in terms of his consistency week to week. I think well earned as a John Eales medalist. Whenever we put the question to the Roar readers, they are always coming back and saying that he's probably the most consistent player and performer. I think he's been the best on field all year. But in terms of the most improved player, I think Jeremy Williams has really transformed that line out and really transformed that. And he's really grabbed that position by the scruff of the neck. And I think he should be really proud of this year. He's been phenomenal.
Yeah, super season, great campaign. It's staggering to think that he was with the Waratahs a couple of years ago, couldn't get many minutes, decides to perhaps move out of his comfort zone, head to the West, and has a heck of a year. And it doesn't surprise me. We saw it in 2023 with the Western Force, had a great breakout season there. He continued it this year. I'm going to say I think best player of the year, most consistent, I agree with you, is Rob Ballatini, but I think the most improved is Tom Wright. I think he's just been superb. Decision-making, his ability to have big moments in big test matches. Couldn't win it for the Wallabies today, but that breakdown steal that he made was just as significant as some of the tries that he scored throughout the year, and he scored a bucket load of them against Wales, against England, against Wales on the Grand Slam tour as well. But he was superb, consistent, and his decision-making was first class. So fair play to him. Hey, Nick, it's a rapid-fire edition for a reason because we don't talk all day. I'm going to be back with Dan Parks early in the week to recap the year that was 2024. But we've got to be pretty proud of it. The Wallabies, despite going down 22-19 to Ireland, you certainly can feel a sense of pride in the Australian rugby jersey that's back. I'm sure there'll be plenty of them worn across the summer. Nick, thanks for your time. I hope you get a bit of sleep, perhaps go back before your morning coffee on this Sunday. Thanks again, Nick.
Cheers, Christy. We'll be back to do it all again next year. I think there's so many positives to take from this tour, and I reckon you should be excited if you are a Wallaby fan for 2025 because that Lions tour is looking a lot more tantalising.
It certainly is. That'll all get underway July 19. Before that, the Wallabies have a so-called warm-up game against Fiji in Newcastle on July 6th. And, of course, Super Rugby, there's a lot of it coming early next year. The Sevens is up and away. The men and the women both playing overnight, and the women on fire, the men with a bit of work to do. But until next time, thanks for joining us on the Roar Rugby Podcast.